The first one to let go is of dopamine. Let go of dopamine. What is dopamine? So first of all, dopamine is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's not a toxin, it's not a parasite, it's not a virus. It's a neurotransmitter. It occurs naturally in our brains. In fact, it's a nice thing because it makes us feel good. But it also occurs sometimes when we're being stimulated in other ways. So it could be when we're scrolling. How many of you feel like you've been up late at night and you're just kind of scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, right? And there's that content that's just really exciting that you once saw, and then you're looking for some other content. You're looking to be entertained. Or you're sitting up late at night watching Netflix or another one of them, streaming services. Our brains release dopamine when we experience pleasure, when we experience a sense of reward, a sense of, good feelings. And it's not a bad thing. But sometimes what happens is that our brains get in the habit of wanting more, and we're just not getting it, right? It's like, I've watched that first episode, maybe that second episode, and then it's like, okay, I want to keep watching. I just want to sit there and essentially binge, right? What happens is that sometimes our brains can get on this sense of like treadmill. Like we're just trying to feed it this stimulation, this reward, and then it's not really going anywhere. And the consequence of that is sometimes it can lead us to get stuck. Or it can lead us to feel like we don't have a lot of motivation because we're just kind of stuck in just trying to be stimulated, right? So I'm going to show you a graph, okay? This is perhaps the most nerdy thing I'll show you today. This graph here, very simple. It's a graph for your mood, how you're feeling. The higher it is, the better you feel. The lower it is, the worse you feel. This is what we call homeostasis, right? The tendency for a system to try and maintain equilibrium. But what happens when you introduce something foreign or something really stimulating to your brain, whether let's use substances, right? Like you take, let's go with something a bit more intense, like let's say cocaine, right? Take cocaine, gives you that high. Not that I'm speaking from experience, but again, no shame. And then what happens, because it's something really intense, your brain is like, whoa, this is different, this is external, this is throwing the balance out of course, so I need to balance it out. So then you experience the low. And then what happens is because you feel low, you feel an even greater need for something that's stimulating, something that's pleasurable, again, like some sort of hard drug. So you take it again, but then you realize it doesn't go as high. So then you start to take it again and again and again, and then it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. It's this roller coaster. But what happens is that over time, that balance point, that midpoint, that homeostatic point starts to go down over time. And this happens with not just necessarily cocaine, but it also happens with alcohol. It also happens with caffeine and nicotine. And it can even happen with non-substances, with just behaviors that give us a lot of pleasure, such as scrolling and watching things. So I'm not shaming watching or going on social media or anything like that. As you can see, I have a lot of pop culture references in my talk, so I definitely consume that stuff. But my thought to you is, and this is, from research, is that sometimes when we get sucked in this dopamine cycle or dopamine treadmill, it can lead to a lack of motivation or even a lack of energy, where we're feeling like I don't have the motivation to do anything, to go off and do the tasks I need to do. And it can also lead us to feel like we need a greater quantity of whatever it is, or greater intensity of whatever stimulates us. And then we end up chasing that high, because then the chasing the high ends up becoming chasing normal. I just want to feel okay, and I need something to feel okay. And then it becomes a need. Here's what we can do instead. Something called a dopamine detox. Anyone heard of a dopamine detox? Maybe? Yes? No? Okay. So dopamine detox is not trying to get rid of dopamine, because again, it's not a toxin, it's a naturally occurring neurotransmitter in your brain. But essentially, it's, Fasting. Ah, the church was right all along. Fasting. Uh, so we said to them, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. So, in addition to the spiritual value of fasting, I think that there's a psychological value to fasting as well, even fasting from stimulation. Because what happens is if we fast from essentially pleasure and stimulation to a certain extent, not depriving yourself, living a wretched life, but it can then make our brains more sensitive to dopamine. It's kind of like, imagine getting out of prison and then tasting ice cream for the first time in I don't know how many years. Wow, it tastes amazing. Or of course, if you fasted for like Great Lent and then you have that first bite of meat, I'm not going to say it in Arabic because you'll laugh at me. Yeah, it feels amazing, right? So, what does it look like in practice? I'm not saying Great Lent is coming and, fast from Netflix or social media or anything like that, but here's some ideas that might help you get things done. Do the less gratifying things first. So, when you wake up in the morning, instead of, I don't know what you might do. For me, it might be playing video games or watching TV or spending a lot of time on social media. If I get work done first and then save the pleasurable things for afterwards, I'm more likely to get through the work. But if I do the pleasurable things first, then it makes it a lot harder for me to focus because it just feels dull if I'm trying to do work. Does that make sense? Next thing you can do is if you notice that you're stuck on the treadmill, get off the treadmill. So if you notice that, for example, you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and it's keeping you up at night and for me, I love playing Free Cell for some reason. There's no purpose to it. It's just fidgeting, right? If I'm noticing that I'm just playing and playing and playing and I can't let go and it's keeping me up, there's nothing that will make me feel good enough to let go. Does that make sense? Or if I'm just scrolling on social media, there's nothing that it'll be like, I feel satisfied after watching that video on TikTok. I can now put my phone down. It's very unlikely to happen. So instead, the idea is just let go. Notice you're on the treadmill, get off. It might not feel good, but it'll help. And of course, take dopamine breaks. So this is the cleanse type of thing. So if you want, you can take time away from certain things that are extra stimulating, engaging in boredom, sitting in silence, going outside for a walk, when you're driving, not listening to a podcast, not talking to someone on the phone, not listening to Spotify, just being out in nature, reducing that fun, pleasurable stimulation can be cleansing, and then you can come back to it and then really savor it and just fall in love with music again.